News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. If you've experienced abusive relationships, or you know someone, or you're concerned or care about someone who's in an abusive relationship, you'll want to watch our show today. Our guest is Jose Perrine, and she is the author of this book, The Saber-Toothed Tiger, The One Reason Women Stay with Abusive Men. You know, that question is often asked, why does she still stay with him? And in this book and in the interview today, Jose Perrine will be talking with us about her answer from her research and her work with hundreds and hundreds of women in therapy that she's come to about why women stay, and then also some answers and some solutions for what women can do to stop those patterns of abusive relationships and have really good, healthy lives. So our guest is Jose Perrine. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice at Sierra Counseling and Neurotherapy in Carson City. Jose is also an instructor at the University of Nevada, Reno, teaching family interactions. And she does a weekly group for women who have experienced domestic violence, for the Advocates to End Domestic Violence. And Jose, it's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased.
So, Jose, the title of your book, The Saber-Toothed Tiger, is the way it starts out. That's quite a scary title. How did you come up with that?
I wanted the title to really reflect how terrifying this fear is that women have if they leave their abusers. And it had to be something that was so scary, because if you think about it, these women are risking their lives and their children's lives with their abusers. So if that isn't terrifying enough, there must be something even more terrifying that would keep them from leaving. And so I wanted the title to reflect that this is a genuine, almost visceral type of fear that women have about leaving abusive relationships.
Yeah, and so that image of the saber-toothed tiger really gets that idea across, doesn't it?
Right, the saber-toothed tiger was one of the scariest animals in history, so I wanted to really convey that fear and that terror.
So, Jose, I guess one of the things I'd like to ask you then is, like, what are the reasons that are usually given for why women stay in abusive relationships?
I've been counseling abused women now for about 10 years. And what surprised me very often when I first started was that women would beat up themselves, and they didn't have an answer. They would say things like, you know, I must be really stupid, I don't know how to pick men, I'm a magnet, I attract all the wrong men. And they would be just as confused as other people would be about, I don't know why I can't leave. And so I would begin questioning, what do you think will happen if you leave? And they would say things like, well, my children will starve. But then if you explore that a little further, that's really an unreasonable response. Most of these women, hardworking, many of them have professional jobs. I see a range of people in different socioeconomic status. It cuts across every limit there of money and income resources. And so we would explore these things. What do you think will happen? And people would say things like, well, he has an anger problem, or he's bipolar, or he has an addiction, and that's a disease, so I promised I wouldn't leave, you know, if he's ill. Usually when they're looking at the man to explain what's going on, their thinking is that, well, if I can discover what's wrong with him, then I can fix it and I won't have to leave. And then after you explore that, they get into things like, well, I'm codependent, or I have low self-esteem. So we explore all of those things. And of course, there's a chapter in there on sex. Oh, it's the best sex I ever had. Very unreasonable. So we explore all of those, and then we get to the real reason why women are staying with their abusers.
Let's stay in this segment, Jose. Let's stay a little bit longer with what are the reasons that we typically hear So I guess there's a financial argument, there's a self-esteem argument.
Right. The self-esteem argument is one I address first because that's a very common one, and you'll even read it in different research, etc. But if you look at this, you see women who are out working. They are able to set boundaries in the workplace. They are able to stand up for themselves. They have adequate finances and resources. They go home and something changes. They don't stand up for themselves. They lose their identity in that relationship. And so I address that self-esteem is contextual. It depends on situation. Somebody can have great self-efficacy outside of a relationship, but something happens inside an emotional relationship where that self-esteem is so damaged.
Okay.
Finances really is one that doesn't take very long to work through because most people have something where they are aware of resources. They know of shelters, they know of food banks, etc. We have resources in this country where people really, their children are not literally going to starve.
Yes.
But I think women talk themselves into that as a reason to stay instead of facing this reality of what's really going on.
Those are some really good points that frequently we do hear in our culture about why women stay. And after this brief break, we're going to talk with José Perrine, the author of this book. And from her research, she's going to share with us why women do stay in abusive relationships. Well, and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with José Perrine, the author of The Saber-Toothed Tiger, The One Reason Women Stay with Abusive Men. So, José, could you tell us a little bit more about the financial reason that we frequently hear about why women stay?
Right. Right before we went to that break, I mentioned that, that's frequently brought up that, my children are going to starve. And in the book, I address an article or a book that was written in 1978 that said, when women have equal parity with men in the workplace, when they are able to make a living, domestic violence is going to end. In fact, the opposite happened. We have higher rates of it now than ever. Of course, more people may be reporting it, but it has not decreased. More women are in college now. More women are probably working now than men with our economy. And we still see domestic violence, violence in the home.
Yeah. And so this really brings us then to the research that you've done and the work that you've done with so many women who have been involved in abusive relationships, and that is the one reason why women stay. Can you share that with us?
Yes. What I found from working over these years and continuing with that questioning of what do you think is going to happen if you leave, many times women will say, well, I'm going to end up old and alone, to which I reply, you're probably going to anyway because we outlive men. So, and then I get serious about it and I say, haven't you ever been alone? Do you ever go somewhere by yourself or go shopping by yourself or sit and read a book by yourself? And of course they say, well, yeah, I've been alone. And I said, what do you think will happen if you are alone without a partner? It is so difficult for them to say the word lonely. I'll be lonely. Once we get to that point and they begin to verbalize that, inevitably there are tears, crying, a wealth of emotion coming out because they finally realize what's really going on. That is the fear of the tiger, loneliness. And it is a particular type of loneliness. It isn't like what other people feel when they break up with somebody and they call mom and dad and say, gee, I'm going through this breakup. I'm feeling really bad about it. But they know that there's going to be other opportunities to have partners, or they focus on something in their own life like their education or their career. But with these women who, and I'm going to say pick abusive men because it is a choice and there is a certain type of man that they choose, it is a different kind of loneliness. It is pervasive, it is profound, it is ongoing, and it has been there since birth.
So since birth, can you tell us a little bit more about that? So these are adult women who are in abusive relationships. They choose to stay in the relationship because the saber-toothed tiger is this aloneness or loneliness.
Loneliness.
A loneliness. Mm-hmm. And you found, Jose, that these women, since from birth, have had this particular kind of loneliness.
I have done this experiment in a group after discovering what was really going on. I will hand out paper and I will say, write 3 words that describe how you felt most of the time growing up. Inevitably, everyone in that group will have the word lonely. And yet, they don't come from abusive homes. They might have, but it's not necessary. Some are middle class. They've had good educations. Their parents were there. Their parents may or may not have been divorced. But there was this profound emptiness, loneliness that they had since childhood. And it took me a while. There isn't a lot of research out there on loneliness, so it took me a while to find some on that. And the best description I found of it was by a psychiatrist in Israel named Gilliam. And he delineated between what he describes as loneliness in a state of doing and loneliness in a state of being. Mm-hmm. And he describes when people are lonely in a state of doing, it's like I said earlier, they have maybe moved away, they don't know people, they've broken up a relationship, and the other person isn't there, but they're still okay. They're just experiencing a feeling. In a state of being, these people feel as if they don't exist. He describes that obliteration, coming apart, not existing, not being. And it's interesting because one of my clients one time, when she was describing how it felt when she did not have a partner in her life, she said she felt like her body was coming apart, like she did not exist. There was nothing to her.
Well, so Jose, we want to explore this further with you right after this brief break, this phenomenon of loneliness and how women in abusive relationships can deal with that in a healthy way. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Jose Perrin, the author of The Saber-Toothed Tiger, The One Reason Women Stay with Abusive Men. So Jose, picking up this idea of loneliness, what is the value of loneliness?
If you, going back to the saber-toothed tiger and our primitive beginnings, if you realize that all of our feelings have survival value, the value of loneliness, if we were living in the caves by ourselves, we would not survive. We needed a clan, a tribe around us. Men could not go out and hunt. If they got hurt, they needed people to help them. Women could not have raised children without someone to do the hunting and taking care of. So we are tribal people, if you will. And that feeling of loneliness came from if we were alone in those conditions, in our primitive conditions. It would have been very scary because saber-toothed tiger probably would have eaten us. And so we are now not living in the caves, and we can call out at midnight for pizza if we want to, but we still are stuck with this feeling that if we are alone and lonely, there's a threat to our survival. And the women that I help and the women that I write about in this book have an acute awareness of this loneliness from birth. And coming into the world, unwanted, unloved, parents too busy, too broke, too high, whatever the reason was, that child was not welcomed into the world and loved. And these children grow up knowing this. And I say women, but it occurs with men also. They grow up with this loneliness, and they know that if they are not cute or funny or smart or whatever it is that's going to get that parental love, they're going to die. And there's been some very interesting research, and that's in the book also about...
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that research, okay?
The most interesting one is by Easy Tronick, who did still-face studies. And they're called still-face because they would put the baby, as young as 2 months old, they've done this research. And it's kind of a cruel type of experiment, but it was significant. Put the baby in an alcove where all he can see is his mother sitting opposite him. And the mother comes in, and there's a curtain around her, too. So there's this very limited focus. And they put a camera on both of their faces and do some heart rate, skin galvanic research with the baby. And for the first minute, the mother is instructed to look at the baby, interact with the baby, play with it, talk with it. And you see the baby really reacting. He's smiling, kicking his feet, moving his hands. And then the mother gets ready to leave. And as she gets up to leave, you see the change in the baby. And he begins to get anxious. His heart rate goes up. He follows her with his eyes until she leaves. Then they tell the mother, stay away for 1 more minute. She comes back in. But in the next section, she's instructed to look above the baby's head and to keep a still face, express no emotion. Within a minute and a half, the child is in such distress. He tries everything he can to get her attention, to interact again. And when she fails to do that, that child, within a minute and a half, will almost be in a fetal position. Now, if that occurs with a new baby in a minute and a half, what does it do over 10 years or 15 years of really not being seen, of being an invisible person? You're fed, you're clothed, but you're not loved.
And so, again, that kind of brings us back to this image of the saber-toothed tiger, and that's the saber-toothed tiger that is so frightening to women in abusive relationships. And right after this brief break, we're going to continue talking with Jose about this very important topic. Well, welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking about women getting out of that pattern of abusive relationships with Jose Perrine. So, Jose, when a woman sees that she needs to change and she wants to change, and you're there as the therapist to support or facilitate this change, can you tell us about this change process that a woman goes through?
The first thing we talk about, make sure the woman is in a safe place, and many are in shelters or have moved out of their abusers and it has restraining orders, etc. The next step is always no contact. You must get away and be able to clear your own thinking and not have that, what I call the Hitler voice in your head, no longer living up to his expectations. So there's no contact. I make a joke, I say, well, if you get a letter and you open it and there's money or a check or money order in it, you can keep it, but that never happens.
That's okay contact.
Yeah. So then when they get moved away from it a little bit and can hear their own voice in their head, I give them an exercise which is probably the most difficult thing they're going to have to do, and I call it sitting with the tiger. And I tell them, you go in a room and you get a very uncomfortable chair, because I don't want you to fall asleep in that chair. You get a very uncomfortable chair and you sit with no radio, no music, no TV, no book, no television, nothing. And you sit there for an hour. I've had women tell me they'd rather jump out a window, that they will die, that they cannot do it. In fact, women who are reading the book have told me when they get to that part, they quit reading because it is so frightening for them to sit with the tiger. And I tell them they're not to not to meditate, not to pray, not to think. They are to just sit. And what happens in there then is they begin to truly experience that loneliness. There is nothing there. They have to sit with it. Eventually, if they do that every day, try to make it an hour, and I know that people start out with 5 and 10 minutes, and that's pretty much their maximum. But once they continue to practice that, it truly gets transformed. It gets transformed into a sense of, I can do this. I can live with this. I might have felt really afraid. I might have been very, very scared when I sat here that I was just going to fall apart. But once they do it, they realize this is not going to kill me. I'm not going to die. I can survive this.
So the saber-toothed tiger is really not as frightening as they've thought all these years, huh?
In fact, at the end of the book, I say something about you can share the fire and lie down together by the fire and tame the tiger. Yes.
So, Jose, can you tell us a little bit more? I guess the group dynamic is important, too, for women to come together and share and
I think that's
support
good initially,
one another.
Because for people not to feel alone. And so, again, that sense of community, or I'm not the only one experiencing this. But the work can be done either individual counseling or group process.
I see.
I've had wonderful success with it, but I will say that women who have been in abusive relationships it will take at least 2 years to go through all of these steps of regaining their identity, getting free, learning to live with the loneliness, learning how not to pick abusive men the next time. And all of that is in the book. There are exercises for them to do in the book, and it's a sequential process to go through.
Jose, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the changes that a woman needs to make to lead a more healthy lifestyle and make healthy choices?
Once she recognizes what's really going on, that she is responsible for picking these men, a lot of the literature, in fact, I read something today that again went back to let's focus on the men and their behavior and how society is socializing them to be violent, etc. There's a chapter in the book, it's called It's Not About the Men. If women had this sense of belonging and love from childhood, they would not pick men who give them what I call the sugar rush. They would be able to be okay with themselves, and they would not need someone who has that intense emotion. It's not love, it's intense emotion. And they would make healthier choices. But there's a chapter again in there called Practice Dating. So that how to go out on a date, what to look for, what characteristics to look for in men.
Well, Jose, this is really great. I mean, we could do 2 or 3 more shows on this topic, and on your book, I think it's been so great to have you here and share your wisdom and your experience with us. Thank you very much for coming and sharing.
It's been a pleasure.
And this is the book, The Saber-Toothed Tiger. If you've been touched by some of the things that Jose has talked about, please get this book. And of course, you could also call to speak with Jose at Sierra Counseling and Neurotherapy in Carson City as well. We want to thank you for joining us. We want to invite you to come back and spend some time with us next month, and we'll see you then.